All of you, and Congressman, I'll start with you, would and should the U.S. actually commit U.S. troops to defend Taiwan if China were to move?
You know, I think that this is such a, I think that this is of course a very longstanding policy of the United States. And I think what we are hoping for is that we want to make sure that we never get to that point.
China, is without question, I think, a very real threat to a lot of the important things that Americans do every day to make a living, take care of their families. And so if we're competing on a level playing field, we're all for competition, but the fact of the matter is that they don't compete on a level playing field, and that's part of why I've always said tariffs need to be a part of a conversation. Understanding that we're holding everyone to a similar standard has to be a very important part of real fair competition, but that's not how it's been historically, and certainly I think that remains a very serious concern when we think about China and what their capacity is, and all of the tactics that they undertake to observe and learn from and steal our intellectual property remains continuous concerns on top of a lot of others.
Congresswoman?
No, I think China is, of course, an ascendant global power, growing very quickly, acting in its own self-interest. And oftentimes in Washington, there's this frame between conflict and competition. I think sometimes, depending on what's happening, that rhetoric can get a little conflict-driven. And I think that it's really a question of competition, and to the governor's point, fair competition. But when I think about that, I think about how the United States, if you want to assert oneself as a global competitor, the kinds of things that one would do in order to really assert that position is investments in science and technology, which we are gutting our NIH, we are gutting our health science research, we are cutting the very things that make us a global power in that respect in terms of government and public funded research, which is what allows innovation in a more broad sense as opposed to privatized research. An ascendant global power would invest heavily in innovative energy solutions so that it could be sovereign in that respect. And the United States at this point, instead of expanding our energy mix, we are actively narrowing our energy mix to become increasingly more reliant on fossil fuels instead of, in contrast to what you see is happening in China. Yes, they burn a very large amount of fossil fuels, but they have also invested dramatically in wind and solar and in energy innovation. And so to me, I see this as a question of competition and, of course, of trade, to the governor's point, but we have to make sure that we are having, I think, a reflection and a reflective conversation about how are we positioning ourselves to continue to offer the world the best of what America has to offer.
And to all of you, and Congressman, I'll start with you, would and should the U.S. actually commit U.S. troops to defend Taiwan if China were to move?
I think that this is such a, I think that this is of course a very longstanding policy of the United States. And I think what we are hoping for is that we want to make sure that we never get to that point. And we want to make sure that we are moving in all of our economic research and our global positions to avoid any such confrontation and for that question to even arise.
Ambassador?
Well, I mean, obviously that would be the president's prerogative as to how to deploy our military. I would just say that we have to deter and defend like we do here on the European continent, and most importantly, and I think one of the things that President Trump was able to accomplish by having NATO agree to 5% of GDP on defense and defense-related items is ultimately, that's now the international standard. That's the Koreans are planning to move out on that. We expect others in the Pacific to commit to that new global standard that we set at The Hague last year. But ultimately, sort of the plans to defend Taiwan and the president's trade space, I think for any administration, especially this administration, needs to be as broad as possible to manage that risk. And as a lawyer, I learned long ago not to play hypotheticals either.
I mean, if you talk about foreign policy, you're in the hypothetical business.
Yes.
Governor?
Contingency business.
Contingency business.
I guess I would just simply say that I think that Taiwan's independence, as I think Ukraine's independence, is just, and I think that it is it's in the strategic interest of the United States.
On Ukraine, what does victory look like?
Ambassador?
No, please. I'd love to hear your answer.
It is. The two that I am on the panel with are much more steeped in foreign policy than a governor is. But I do think that Ukraine's independence, keeping their land mass, and having the support of all the allies, I think is the goal from my vantage point. Go ahead, Ambassador. Do a better job.
I think, Congresswoman, I want to follow the order of protocol here.
Well, of course, there's no conversation about Ukraine that can happen without Ukraine, and so they, of course, lead in terms of setting their terms on this. But I think that overall, as a principle, we shouldn't reward imperialism, and I don't think that we should allow Russia to continue, or any nation to continue, violating a nation's sovereignty, and to continue to be rewarded, and whose main lesson and takeaway is that they will gain. And so what that looks like in the specifics, I think, is a deeper conversation. But on principle, I think that is what we should be pursuing.